Okay, so hello and welcome to our summer edition of the Ether Chat. My name is Anna Corson, and today I'm very privileged to be joined by an incredibly talented musician and performer, Thanda Gumede. Ether is an interdisciplinary project and invites to explore the question, how do people of conflicting worldviews, memories, and future visions encounter each other? We work in collaboration with Opera North, Leeds Museums and Galleries, and are funded and supported by an international HRC research network. In April 2021, we held our first Ether seminar where a wide range of participants took part by submitting their provocations and engaging in meaningful conversations with the peer panelists. And even though the seminar took place online, we still enjoyed hours and hours of conversations, discussions, talks, and even a live performance. So today I'm looking forward to hearing Thanda, your reflection on the seminar, and perhaps even extending some of the conversations. So welcome, Thanda, very big welcome to you, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello. Lovely to be here. Uh, these little things you're mentioning have just resuscitated very fond memories of the conference.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit more context and introduce you, Thanda. So Thanda, you are originally from South Africa.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
so,
started singing when you were very, very little. Your mom was your first audience. Just correct me if I'm wrong anywhere.
no, I'm just impressed at how you got a lot of this right. Yes.
Okay, but please do interrupt me. I was trying to synthesize so much that I know about you in just a very little paragraph. So,
Oh, bless you.
you then carried on singing in churches, and you did this for about 18 years.
Yeah, basically. um,
Doing so far so good, yeah.
yeah, so far so good. So far so
Okay,
good.
and then you moved to the UK. And when you moved to the UK, you really beautifully combined your skills, your knowledge, your experience, and your heritage. And you managed to create something extremely extraordinary and very creative, and yet still bursting with culture and your heritage. And you performed in front of 44 members of the British royal family in Buckingham Palace in 2015. And that's only in addition to so many other notable projects, performances, and awards that you have received. So, my first question to you is, what is your inspiration and where do you get it?
Oh wow. It does not show, but I'm actually blushing right now. It's surreal to read about oneself. Sometimes you can't believe those things that happened. Um, Weirdly enough, I think inspiration from me comes from lamentation. So I would know, going back to what you said in terms of my mom being my first audience. This is the interesting about the voice. It was actually in that book just behind me that I read called "This Is a Voice." Is that we never fully have control of our voices. Even when we are young, we're born into this world crying without even knowing how to speak first, and then we sort of learn to exert some control to a certain degree. The first time I sang, I didn't realize I was singing in front of my mom. I thought I was singing internally, and sometimes and things sort of escape, just like you may think you're thinking something only to find that your voice takes over and actually pronounces what I mean. It actually speaks what you're saying, and so she has been my inspiration, and so whenever I was in a place of lamentation, of sadness, music has been the one thing that has enabled me to sort of confront whatever situation I was facing, to be real about it, and also to overcome it. So my mother, as well as lamentation, basically, it's like a natural antidepressant. That is a very sad thing to say. Um,
I think it's very inspiring. Hear that.
yeah, so even when it comes to writing, I don't normally write, but if I go through an extremely rough patch in life, I would find myself writing a song. And it would normally start with that mood and tone of sadness, but eventually it finds a resolution. It resolves whatever tension is there, and it brings me to a place where I can be happy again despite everything that is going on. So it's those two things.
This is brilliant to hear. And you also mentioned this in the seminar, how you could understand the lady singing, even though you could not understand the language and the lyrics. You could still understand it by the tone and the sadness in the song and um, the I don't know, the scales. I don't know the terminology, the scales that they were using. It's fascinating and really interesting. It's communication on a completely different level.
It is a humbling experience because here in the UK, as I mentioned during the provocation, is that there are places where, let's say, we were touring with Zulu tradition. So in those tours, you find that most of the music is in Zulu, and so people have to listen and go beyond the lyrics in order to understand. So it was nice for the shoe to be on the other foot, and then I got to be in that position for the first time. But other things that were incredible, one of the ladies that I mentioned, I think she was singing in Punjabi, is that in Western music, we only have, 12 notes on the piano or keyboard. So she could access at least 24 notes because she was singing on something called the microtonal scale. So for someone who probably doesn't know what that is, the simplest way, maybe an illustration would be there are 26 letters of the alphabet in the English language. So imagine that you could be able to actually split those letters so that you can double them and be able to create more words instead of being limited to just 26 letters. So that is what it was like. And so it was something that was like, oh wow, she can split those notes and do all of those things. So it's always a learning experience, watching other people that we work with through, I think we call it the People's Lullabies, which was a project facilitated and in fact it was a project by Opera North that they asked myself and rather Dave and myself to actually lead alongside Alice Gilmore and Madeline Thorne. It was amazing.
Brilliant, absolutely fascinating. I watched the provocation and it was mind blowing. Thank you, Thanda. So it leads me really to the next question. So in your provocation, you talked about music as a conduit for encounter, but can you tell me more about how it's relevant to ether and what were you probably or maybe hoping to learn or to gain from taking part in this project?
Oh, um, I didn't know what to expect. Uh, and I think that is good in a way because you go in with an open mind. But I did have some conversations with Maggie beforehand, and so she gave me some questions where she said, "Could you be able to try and answer these 7 questions under the subheading of ether? Ether being the acronym for the ethics and aesthetics of encountering the other." And then I had to sit down with, I think Dom from Opera North really helped. He created a team to work with me. I had Alice Gilmore, who was there during the People's Lullabies with me, as well as Roland Thomas, who was also there during the project. So we were able to reminisce and go back. So these were the things that I was trying to, in fact, it was the things that I was trying to communicate. Sometimes, as African people, we find that there is a lot about our culture that can be lost in translation because music for us is not a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
In African culture, in African tradition, especially Zulu and Xhosa heritage as well, we find that music was a mode of education. So we sang songs in order to preserve our history because it was originally not recorded down, but it was orally relayed from the older generation to the younger generation through music, through poetry, and through dance. So even to this day in South Africa, even though there is Google, like South Africa is not a country that is just a tree and some leopards and lions jumping around. South Africa is huge. So I live in the United Kingdom and I believe firmly that I could fit the United Kingdom maybe in South Africa 6 times over.
Wow.
Okay. So it is a big place. In fact, you can fit all of the continents of the world into Africa. And so it is a big place, and within that place I had to drive 12 or 14 hours in order to get to see the lions in South Africa from home.
Right.
And so, while it is a big country, there are um, I think the repercussions of segregation are still there. Is that there are parts that are well developed and parts that are not so well developed, and so in those parts you find that sometimes it is not easy to access information. So it's not a question of absence; it's a question of access. So even though I was in South Africa and there were white people around me and black people and Indian people, and in South Africa the politically correct terminology is colored people, which here in the UK would be inappropriate, but the appropriate term would be mixed race. So I say that in the most utmost respect, to try and respect both countries. So you find that in that place we could not encounter each other because of the colors of our skin. We could not be able to go into the same schools, etc., etc. So when I was born, it was just, I was born during the apartheid era. Then Nelson Mandela came, and we were pronounced free, but there was nothing done in order to make sure that we ameliorate the repercussions of apartheid. So then it became not a question of color but a question of class, that we could not go into certain schools where I could encounter certain people who were different from me because I could not afford to go there. So then this is when music is something that I feel is an amazing thing for me, because I had people like, sorry, the names are hard to pronounce. So um, there was a gentleman called Olani Sitole who won Best Gospel Newcomer at the Gospel Crown Awards in 2016 in South Africa. Before he won any of those awards, etc., he heard me sing in 2002, and he approached me and wanted me to join the choir. I was so scared of joining their choir, but it took 6 months later. I came to the first rehearsal, and he was the person who spent time with me, and he was a jazz student, although we were singing gospel. And then from then I started working with other musicians like Nduduzo Makatini, Sabelo Masondo. I think Nduduzo Makatini has just got signed by the Blue Note in New York. Those people that I venerate. So through those people, I sat at their feet because I could not afford to go to university and study these things. So I sat at their feet. I learned as much as I could, and then I was even lucky enough to even have a one-on-one with Andile Mselegu. The Mselegu family, I will write this down for you, look it up. The Mselegu family are royalty of Afro jazz. And so even my first performance on stage, duet, was with her. And so having learned from all of these people, that is when I first came to the UK, Dave Evans was the first non-black musician that I got to work with. But that connection was facilitated by that experience. So remember, I sang in church, and that the guy saw me who was studying jazz. Then I started working for jazz artists outside of church. So when I came to the UK, it was Zulu tradition. But then this guy thought, hey, what if we take these voices and then collaborate with the jazz quartet? And so without music in the mix, for me personally, I think my class as well as my race would have kept me in a place where I had restricted encounters. And finally, even beyond me, because this is bigger than me, if you go back to study South African history, you will realize that people didn't just wake up thinking that black people and white people won't hang out together. There were actually over 100 mixed marriages a year in South Africa before apartheid. The word apartheid actually means the policy of segregation. So you cannot segregate, you cannot divide, you cannot separate unless there was unity present beforehand. Just like you can't get a divorce unless you get married first.
Yeah.
So people had to actively work hard. I remember, I think in 1948, H.D. Malan was the first Afrikaner president, and their mission, or in fact prime minister at the time, their mission was to cut ties between the United Kingdom and South Africa, because the United Kingdom there was racism, but they did not make racism legal. And so They cut ties from 1948, and then it went from HD Malan to Straydom to Verwoerd, and eventually South Africa became a republic in 1960. That is when the Bantu Education Act came into play, that black people and white people can't go to the same school. Black people and Indian people can't go to the same school, you know. So it separated based on race. That was removing encounters. Then it said you can't date each other, you can't marry each other, the Sexual Immorality Act, the Prohibition of Mismarriages Act, etc. But jazz musicians then started saying, oh yeah, there are musicians who are not allowed to come to our communities. Then we are going to study them from afar and try to emulate and duplicate their music. And then at a certain point, it went to a place where people are like, okay, now that we've done that, they wrote a play called Kong. And then black people and white people and Indian people and mixed race people, or colored, which is politically correct in South Africa, those are the people who came together and said, we want to watch the show together, we don't care what the law says. And then the University of Witwatersrand said, we are a private institution, we will allow people to come in of different races. And so that's when you find that people like Miriam Makeba, as I mentioned, who wrote the song all of those different artists ended up going into exile after a while, because the apartheid government was really swift in making sure that they separate people. So music united us, and there was money and resources put into separating people. So at the core of everything that we do, I find that music has always been building bridges rather than walls.
That's so fascinating. You know what? I need some time to digest everything, because it's incredibly interesting. And as you say, we know very little, I think. Well, I personally know so little, you know, and then there's so much more going on and has been going on. And it's incredible to know how music can be so powerful.
Yeah.
And it's not just for listening, or as you say, it's not just a hobby. There's so much more to it.
Certainly.
So in I think I need some time actually now
I'm
to.
so sorry. I know I threw a lot in there.
it's,
Um,
it,
and I think this is why lived experience is so important, because we can't just get this from reading a book. This is why I'm grateful that we are having these conversations, because you know, anthropologists can get some things wrong and get a lot of things right, but it's the nuance is in the language and the culture, you know, and so it becomes very difficult to be able to capture all of that without, you know, understanding. So if I can make an example, like we are going, like next month it will be July. If I say July to you, you'll think, yeah, July, but in Zulu, July is Ntulikazi. The suffix kazi means great. Ntuli means dust. So we named it as the month of dust, because then that tells you about the weather conditions at the time. In July in South Africa, it's windy and there's a lot of dust. Oh, the roads at the time did not have asphalt, etc. But here, it's summer where I am. You know, I'm wearing a t-shirt. This is the first time I'm cold. And so you can't expect somebody to just know that. They will just look at Ntulikazi July and find that all of those things are lost. Someone will look at the name. Oh, Thanda. Okay. Gumede. Okay, that's it. But the last name, someone who meets me, who knows my culture, will have memorized a poem that is made up of my clan names. And that is so integral. Like, you will think, oh yeah, they're just doing poetry. But what they're doing is actually keeping an archive of their genealogy, because the names, the clan names, are actually listing my forefathers, my patriarchs, and what they did before me. And so it's such a very complex thing that does need a lot of time to unpack and to study. But the mere fact that the initial conversation is happening means a lot.
Yes, it's incredible how much meaning there is behind so many things that we all not always think about, really. And I think this is what I really liked about Ether, because it's an interdisciplinary project, and that's where people from all different disciplines, and artists and educators and linguists and artists and performers and musicians came together, and we looked at the same concept of encountering
Yes.
communication, but from all these different perspectives. And that was incredibly mind blowing to me to just hear all this, because I don't come across art very often in my daily life, or this and that. So it never just comes to my mind that this is what's happening behind the scenes in art, in music, and in many other fields. And it was incredibly fascinating for me to hear and learn. I learned a lot, and
Same
I'm
here,
still
same here. you
learning.
know, because
Thank you.
I can't come across, your area of expertise every day, etc. And sitting down and also getting to listen to other people um, was a mind blowing experience. I
Well,
guess it's about learning from one another.
that's great to hear that. I think this is the whole idea, that we share, but we also learn from each other. And it's there are endless things that we can still learn.
I'm still
So
talking to my friends about either, but that conference, it's just
that's great. Well, maybe next time you can invite your friend and they can
yeah, certainly.
experience it.
They will love it. They will love it.
So during the 2 days, we did have a wild range of things happening, didn't we? And we had discussions, we had loads of questions, and I think we had loads of ideas and maybe answers, and maybe some answers, many answers. I call them ideas, really,
Yes,
because I don't think we were kind of really giving answers. I think we were just kind of thinking out loud, weren't we?
certainly.
There were lots of reflections, lots of personal stories, experiences from around the globe,
Yes.
and again, even a musical performance by Pavel and Jakub.
Oh.
What parts did you enjoy most? And I know this is not the right question to ask, but just tell us, maybe reflect on some of the parts. What kind of struck you the most? Maybe what you took away and you had to think about. What made you think, or what did you just enjoy?
Wow. Uh, I, I enjoyed the um. How can I use this word? I enjoyed the being surrounded by intellectuals, because obviously it was still at the height of lockdown. You're sort of alone with your thoughts, etc. And I define intelligence as, being intelligent is to have the capacity to learn. It's not to be omniscient and all-knowing. It's learning, having the capacity to learn. um, and so there were a lot of people from so many different fields. And for instance, I had to look at a provocation by Cornelia Bock, who was doing her PhD and thesis in Germany. And so that was mind blowing for me, because her focus was on basically a German church and a Ghanaian church coming together in order to try and form a heterogeneous, not necessarily, a monthly heterogeneous interaction, basically. And that struck me because I've never been to Germany. I don't understand a thing about Germany. And yet, as someone who did grow up in church, in another lifetime, but I did grow up in church, and it was interesting to see how these two worlds were trying to marry in a very interesting thing, not in just sharing the same space, but actually trying to create one, um, one, I think, one way to worship and get together. So that I find that really, really interesting, because there was some context as well as some unnavigated waters for me. I thought, how are they going to do it? The way we sing is different. As I mentioned, you find that back home there was a lot of American influences. So you'll find that that the blues scale and minor pentatonic things. Though that's why you'll find that the preacher will be singing and preaching at the same time, sing songy, etc. Whereas having come here in the UK, church was a little bit different. So I was wondering how they will come about, given the language barrier, the cultural barrier, and all of those things. And to see that it has been going on for so many years was an amazing thing. But other things that sort of really, really struck me uh, in a really positive way. I think it was looking at I can't remember his name, but he was from the Leeds Museums and Galleries.
Adam Jaffer.
Yes, yes, Adam. You know, because as sometimes whenever you go to a museum, you know, I go there and I see a lot of, you know, African things, like things from home. Granted, we know the history of colonialism and wars and the looting and everything. But he said something about somebody who actually posed a question and said, hey, you know, what about us? Uh, you know, like, is there anything about us here at home that is also showing that is also representing, you know, us in a way? And I never actually even thought of it that way, that there could be people who actually can actually feel excluded in that sense. I know there's a lot to unpack, but just the thought, you know. And then one other thing that I also really liked was framing certain things, certain nuances in terms of what we say. Like, I think there were a lot of African proverbs and a lot of uh, pieces of information where, when people didn't know the author, you know, it made it like, you know, when they say author unknown or things like that, it made it sound like um, it was the author's fault, or they were negligent, or they didn't keep a record, or they didn't do this, they didn't do that. But just changing the terminology in terms of how we frame those little things actually realizes that, oh, we are the ones who lost out, because really, when they said that, it's not like they went into a studio to record an album. They said something profound, and, you know, even maybe author unknown to us, or we're still looking to find out who said this, etc. So those were the things that I would never think about. I'll just be thinking about lyrics and music and all of those different other things. And finally, to be there, there was somebody from the University of Cape Town, while we were on there, you know, somebody from home, and, you know, on that same call there was somebody from America. And so it was the ability to have a panoramic view of of this same subject. It's like it humbled me. It made me realize that my opinion is just that, just an opinion, and we need each other. We each has a piece of the puzzle that, if we come together, then and only then can we be able to put our grains of truth together and be able to see a bigger picture, as opposed to just tunnel vision, that through the eyes of the musician. But what if I saw that through the eyes of the musician, and through the eyes of a PhD student, and through the eyes of a visual artist, and through the eyes of a poet and an actor and a curator? You know, it just makes life make more sense, and it gives a more informed, um, I guess you're in a position where you are more informed to be able to formulate a more respectable opinion and more trustworthy opinion about what's going on around the world.
I couldn't agree with you more, to be honest, because I felt exactly the same way, and I personally took away so much. And I also picked up the concept of feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And also, you mentioned about feeling familiar and very strange at the same time. That feels exactly, you know, there are so many situations. I have had so many situations where this is exactly the feeling that you experience or I experience. So all this really, you know, really struck me, and also the ownership and responsibilities, and also the conversation about interpreting and translating. Who's got the ownership and responsibility of delivering the message, you know, in another language, because there will always be miscommunication anyway, regardless of language barriers and differences. So that's all that, you know, kind of makes you think, even if you don't come across this in your daily life, it's still something to think about.
Certainly, certainly, you know,
Thank you,
certainly,
Thanda.
I have to
Thank
agree.
you. In so okay, so my next question, and tricky question, and again inspired by personal experience, it's, you know, when you go, when you said that you go to visit schools and when you perform in schools, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I have a little boy, and he's only 7, and I was reading him a story about South Africa recently, and we ended up talking about Nelson Mandela and segregation and power. And then, remember, he's only 7, So the more I tried to explain things to him, the more confused he became,
Oh, bless.
the more frustrated and even upset. And I just felt like, oh my goodness, I am so uncomfortable right now with my own child. And I just felt like, right, this is it. I just want to stop this conversation. I want to abandon this conversation. This is completely out of my comfort zone. But when you go to schools and you share things with this school's children, you must be getting loads of questions from them as well, because you said you don't just tell them, you perform, you dance, and then you tell the story behind it. So how, what sort of questions you get from them, and how do you deal with them? Also, another really fascinating thing what you said about Africa, and it just stuck with me, that is, Africa is not just about trees and giraffes and lions. There's a lot more to that. So what, yes, what kind of questions do you get from school children, and how do you deal with them?
Um, well, it depends because I'm juggling different hats. Um, so if we were touring with Zulu tradition, we made sure that there was an educational program, and we've gone beyond the call of duty to ensure that that is accessible and not just about profit. Because there are instances where I remember a few years ago, well, not a few years ago, it happens constantly where you're on the bus and somebody calls you the N word, for the entire journey, and you walking. I remember after Brexit, I was just walking with a friend of mine, and somebody threw an egg at me, and they shouted the N word, etc. So, going into the schools, because I realized that with in our past, when we were being educated and other people were being educated at a tender age, even there are even white people who were not born racist, but they had to be indoctrinated into racism. The books that I read, I remember my dictionary when I was in high school, sorry, higher primary, so I was about 11 years old. The dictionary defined white as divine, as pure, as holy, but black, and I remember this word, I'm quoting verbatim, it was like um, cockroachness, wickedness, etc. So I found that it was very important that whatever we do, we can go to Buckingham Palace, we can go to West End, we can go everywhere, but we also have to come back to the schools and tell our stories ourselves. I'd be reading. I remember reading at the same year that I started singing. When I was reading about history, they would say, yeah, and maybe the army, if it was not black, it would say they retreated, but if they were black, they would say they fled. So all of those things, etc., those little things, those nuances that are there. So going back into the schools then became a very important thing. I know that a child that is what I call a Zulu tradition experience or a Thanda music experience probably will not grow up to be racist. And so when we go into the schools, this is where we want to create an environment where the kids feel comfortable that they can ask anything, as long as the motive is knowledge and the diminishing of ignorance. I think people should be given that space. We are not allowed to even speak about certain things. Growing up, we didn't have voices as kids in our culture. I didn't know my mother's name until I was doing my last year of high school. I knew her as Thanda's mom, so we could not have these conversations. So your boy is really fortunate that he can ask and get to make you uncomfortable. We could not speak about these things anywhere to anyone. So going into the schools is important. So we go into schools, as I go there alone as Thanda, the freelance. So if I'm going there, it will be something entirely different. I'm a resident artist in a school in Selby every Wednesday right now, and so I'll be working. For instance, I'll be going on using music that they like. They'll be talking about One Direction, Justin Bieber, Ed Sheeran, Mariah Carey, whomever. So those are the people there. And then it would be, if I'm going with Zulu tradition, that's where you find that we are there in traditional Zulu regalia. And that will inspire those stereotypical questions where they'll say, is there electricity in South Africa? Is there this? Is there that? And I counter those things with questions. I'd be like, you're a football fan. I remember in the first year, Zulu tradition was founded in 2010 during the Football World Cup that we were hosting. So I was like, hey, I was watching South Africa. It's like, okay, great. is there electricity in South Africa? And I say, think, did you see a candle in the stadium?
Mm.
You know, you just saw one of the most beautiful marvels of architecture in the Moses Mabhida Stadium, or you know, the stadium in Cape Town, or the Orlando Stadium. You've seen this. Did you see a single candle? No. So what was there? How did you see the game? Because it was at night. Yes, there was electricity. And so it becomes very important to understand that it depends on the context. So when I'm there, dressed in Zulu regalia, I'll be wearing. Do I have it anywhere close? Oh yes, I do. You know, so maybe instead of this, you know,
Brilliant.
this would be my umqhele,
Oh,
which
wow.
you know the Zulu warriors would be wearing, and it will go with imbata, which is made of animal skin, etc. And there will be, more often than not, I always have something with leopard print on, um, but we try to use um, synthetic print, etc. Then there'll be questions like, why are you wearing leopard print? That is because for us, that is a symbol of royalty. So the things that we are wearing and the music that we're performing when we are there triggers those questions. You know, why are you brown? You know, why are you? Is it okay to call you black? Is it okay to call you brown, etc. And all of those things. So the questions are always different. And finally, even as ubunye. So ubunye, when I'm in ubunye, you'll find that I'll be wearing a three-piece suit, or I'll be wearing a contemporary African shirt and other clothes, you know, fancy, with a jazz quartet and other vocalists, Xolani and Noktula, with me. And you'll find that we'll be singing in, you know, neo soul, jazz, and all of those things. And the questions that would inspire would be different as well. So the important thing is to visit these schools not looking the same, not to play a certain part, but to make sure that I dress in different ways and tell them. You'll get things like, what do you eat? It's like, actually, Nando's. We invented Nando's. The first Nando's was in Johannesburg.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yes. If you listen carefully, go to any Nando's. They will play music. They will generically play music that is Portuguese. They will also play music that is from other parts of Africa, and they will also play music that is in Zulu, in my native tongue. That is because I think the founder of Nando's bought, it was like one shop. So he bought the shop from this guy who was using Portuguese spices to make this chicken. And then he bought it, and then it branched on from there. I think 2014 or 2015, I was invited in Wales, where they had all of the Nando's employees from around the world, from around the United Kingdom, in their training. You know, they paid us well, and they said, "You wanted anything else?" I said, "I wanted chicken." I said, "Yeah, you can take some home." I was like, "It would be cold," and they paid me in a Nando's check. I'll try and find a picture of that to send to you. It said, "I didn't know we could do that. I could redeem anywhere." I think I redeemed it in London. So it's just important to say, I need you to see me in my traditional imvunulo, when I'm wearing the umqhele, imbata, all of those animal skins. But I want you to see me in my t-shirt as well, and I want you to see me in my African shirt, and I want you to see me in my three-piece suit. Don't put me in a box. So that's the thing. We need to get them to see us in all of those different contexts. I've started even bringing recordings of certain things that, hey, look, I'm dressed in a three-piece suit, but hey, look at this picture. This is what we dress like sometimes. Or if I'm wearing the animal skin, I said, look at me in a contemporary context. It's very important to show people all sides of this coin, because sometimes other people are responsible for perpetuating certain stereotypes just to make a quick buck, and they reinforce certain things instead of saying, actually, this is the reality. And finally, this is weird. Movies have played an integral part. I'm a Marvel fan. An integral part in actually educating kids, because those questions are diminishing. While I've been in every corner of the United Kingdom, with with my friends Xolani, Sandile, Noktula, Maboni, Ntando, there are so many of them. Paul, Twala, Sia. We travel everywhere, but Marvel just released a movie where there was a scene where like the Hulk and Iron Man were fighting in Johannesburg. And then when I said I'm from South Africa, and then kids were like, we know. And so representation in movies is a very, very important thing. And we begin to see our own people like Nomzamo Mbata in the latest Coming to America movie. It's like, hey, look at that. You know, we see people from back home being, you know, represented in American movies. Or even that movie, it's saying Coming to America, it's placed somewhere in Africa. But we had people who were actually, you know, African there. Movies like the Black Panther, you know, for the first time in my life, I didn't need subtitles. You know, they butchered the language, but they tried. Bless them, they tried. And so it was beautiful, and that was a learning experience. People would begin asking, where is that language from? Actually, the language they're speaking was Xhosa, which is the language Nelson Mandela speaks. Ah, but why were they speaking in Nigerian accent when they were speaking English? Well, that was a good thing, because an accent is basically speaking a language using the rules of another language, to quote Trevor Noah. And so it inspires those questions, and people began to see Africa in a positive and a beautiful light, and we needed that.
Absolutely. Wow, this is great. And I think the students must really appreciate, and they see so many sides again. And it's not just the trees and grass, you know, there is. And it's not just I don't know, it's not just what we probably expect. Even I've learned already, I don't know, tons of new information today that I had no idea about. And you know what you said about Nando's is completely that's brilliant. I think that the schools that you visit are so privileged and so lucky to have you and learn so much about this. And it's not just about, as you say, it's not just about the color, it's knowing about the culture and traditions. It's, you know, the color doesn't represent everything. It's there's so much more behind every culture and every tradition.
Certainly. And I'm the one who feels lucky, you know, they could have called anyone. It's still mind blowing that you're talking to me, you know. It is a very humbling thing. And thank you, I really appreciate it. Or even to even ask some of those questions, really, it's just mind-boggling. But really, again, thank you for initiating and facilitating those conversations. A massive shout out to Ether,
Thank you.
and all of their associated organizations.
I will definitely pass on the message to everyone.
Please do.
Thanda, I have one final request for you, and I don't know if you're up for it, but you've mentioned your family song a number of times and how you remember the names. Is there any chance you could do a little bit of demonstration, just recite the song? I don't know how, I don't even know, how does it happen? Is it a poem or what is it? Just give us a little, you know, a small example of how do you remember your family names?
Oh wow! Oh, okay. Fortunately for me, that's not that's not a song, but that's a poem.
Yeah.
And so basically, you memorize these lines. So for me, my last name is Gumede. So the Bantu people can be traced back to Umguni. That is why we are called the Ngunis. So I didn't know that, but I had to memorize the poem. So in my poem, I had to memorize the names of the people before me. So it was Gumede, Wabe, Yeyeye, wena oyengabantu ngendaba bebe bedla inyama, or ube udle nibe nidla inyama. So I was like, oh, okay, Gumede, that's a name. It was a person. Wabe, that was the person before them. Yeah, that was another person, but there's a line about this person. Uyengabantu ngendaba. Oh, that explains it. That's why I'm so talkative. Uyengabantu ngendaba. He keeps keeping people in conversation, but he was busy eating meat while he was doing that, so they didn't want to share the meat. When uyengabantu ngendaba, you keep people embroiled in the story while you're busy eating the meat. So I know something about my family now, and it goes on and on to say Mnguni. When it got to Mnguni, that's when I realized that all of the other clans, they may have different names, but they all come back to the Ngunis, you know. And that becomes like, we are many, but we are actually one. So if I say that without explaining, it would just sound like, it sounds like praise songs, Kumedes, if they are in a distance. Wabe, yeah, Mnguni. Wena oyengabantu ngendaba nibe nidla inyama. Phakathwayo, mazala nkosi, you who give birth to kings, you know. And so then I'm learning things about my family. It's like, oh, okay, that's what it means. Zala, to give birth, nkosi, king. And so those are the names. Somebody else with a different surname will have their own names. But the interesting thing is that if there is a similar lyric or line, then that means we are related and you can't marry into that family.
Wow. Brilliant. The language sounds so beautiful. I know these are only the names. I can only imagine how the full language sounds. It's very, it goes up and down. It's very, there's a melody in the language. I love it.
Thank you.
Great.
You
Tango,
know,
it's been
you'll find that in South Africa, people will be fascinated by other languages. People will be like, "Oh, we're fascinated about English," whereas here it's the other way around, and I think that's a fascinating thing as well.
It's brilliant. Thank you, Thanda. It was so interesting. It was so inspiring to hear. And I know there's a lot more, I have a lot more questions for you, and we could probably spend another week talking about this thing.
Time is against us, unfortunately.
But you are a very busy man. You've got a lot of mountains to conquer today. I know you're already performing tonight, and that's supposed to be your day off today, yeah?
Yeah, my friend Dave Evans just texted and said, "Hey, what's up? I so sure you should notice." But yeah, we'll try to make it work. We'll try to make it work.
Well, good luck, and I really thank you so much from the entire EFA team, and I look forward to watching your new performances, to know more about your projects. I'm wishing you all the inspiration and all the creativity for all your future works, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
Oh, thank you. The feeling is mutual, and I echo similar sentiments. Looking forward to seeing more from you too.
Thank you, Thanda. See you later.
Bye bye.